Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Broadband Institute's virtual summit series on the occasion of its annual Progress Summit, which is no less than Canada's largest multi-sector progressive gathering of leaders, academics, and activists. With this year's edition focusing on building a caring economy to speed recovery, the summit aims to grapple how to build a caring economy with decent work and quality services, including needed improvements of our cherished healthcare system. My name is Laeticia Thissen, and I'm a FEPS Gender Equality Policy Advisor, and I have the immense pleasure to moderate this session where we will be looking at how to value work in the caring economy, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, which hit the world and is certainly the most profound in living memory. It is at once a public health, a political, a social, and a socio-economic crisis. Its reach is long, and its effects are likely to be lasting. Our ability to socialize and to work has been drastically curtailed. Very often, basic human needs could not be met. The long-term consequences of this will play in the coming years. The pandemic constituted a sudden shock to our ways of lives. However, a less violent eruption, but with stakes no lower, has been bubbling below the surface for many years already. And here I'm speaking of the domain of care work, which has suffered heavy and multiple cuts over the years as a result of neoliberal approaches to care. In the current context, many forms of work have stopped or are being increasingly done from home. Care work, however, has never been suspended, and it cannot be online. An essential component of care is that it requires human interaction, and it takes time. It cannot and should not be automated. Care workers have been at the front line, putting their health at risk for the sake of others. And outside of the medical professions, care work is often poorly paid and very precarious. Just as paid care work gets little recognition, unpaid care work is even less celebrated. Care work in the domestic sphere takes many forms, including the care and raising of children, the care of the disabled and the elderly. Many activities come as a direct support to care, such as the preparation of meals or household cleanings. Domestic labor has a clear impact on the well-being of others and ourselves as well, despite the lack of recognition that it receives. And yet society is such that more focus on domestic and care work means less time for participating in political and economic life. It renders unpaid carers dependent on others for economic resources and political representation. But without care and domestic work, there can be no political and economic life. So far, it is not clear what type of society will emerge once the global pandemic is over. It is our hope that care work continues to receive the attention that it has recently gathered and begins to be properly valued. Therefore, today we are going to address some of these issues with our experts from Canada and from beyond, who come together for an insightful discussion about how to build a caring economy that truly supports its highly female-dominated and racialized workforce, recognizing the true value of this crucial part of our economy. I'd like to mention also to our audience that you can expect to actively engage with us, so please feel free to use the hashtag Progress Summit or hashtag Care4Care in order to share your impressions and reactions on social media. So make sure that you take this opportunity to engage from wherever you're sitting on the other side of the screen. So without further ado, I would like to start with the first round of introduction of our honorable speakers. First of all, we have Fay Faraday, who is a nationally recognized social justice lawyer and immigrant worker activist based in Toronto. She has litigated many leading human rights and constitutional cases at the Supreme Court of Canada. Second, we have Barbara Helfferich from Germany. She's an independent consultant on gender and environment issues who has more than 25 years of experience in European policy making and gender equality. Over the course of her career, she worked in the NGO sector as well as in the EU institutions. And last but not least, we have Armine Yalnizyan, who is an Atkinson fellow, an Atkinson fellow, on the future of workers and a leading voice on Canada's economic scene. So let me wish a very warm welcome to our honorable speakers, and I feel I could not be in a better company today to be discussing today's topic.
Thank you, Laeticia.
So to kick off the discussion right away, I would like to ask each of you to tell us what you think is at stake when we talk about building up the care economy as part of our recovery, and more precisely, what we hope to achieve. Who would like to kick off this round?
I'll be happy to kick that off. I think that what's really at stake right now in this moment is whether we are, as a society, going to double down on a predatory form of racial capitalism that drives this deep income inequality between the wealthy and Indigenous, racialized women, migrant people, and people with disabilities. What we've seen in the pandemic is how those fault lines in society have been deepening. And the already widening income inequality has been expanding ever more so. So the choice is, are we going to double down on that, or do we build a society that actually closes that gap and builds security for all? I think what we need to be doing at this moment is lifting from the bottom. So building security from the bottom, building good, decent jobs with livable wages in the sector of social infrastructure, which is necessary to make communities function. As we know, care work makes all other work in the economy possible, but care work also keeps us connected and functioning as societies. And I think it's not just a matter of building the care economy, it's about building an economy based on an ethic of care that puts the well-being of people and the well-being of the planet and all living beings at the center and as a priority above profit maximizing. So that's just the small thing that we're faced with choosing between right now.
Well, thank you very much for this very powerful first input. And now I would like to give the floor to Barbara to tell us about what she thinks are the stakes.
I mean, I share very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I share very much the views we just heard. What is at stake? Really, we are at a watershed. We have the possibilities, the opportunities, actually, to guide a paradigmatic shift away from this kind of Neolithic economics and towards a care-centered economy. We have the opportunity to understand the value of care and the value of care even in the most invisible forms in households, in single-headed households. For example, the pandemic has shed light on the essentialness of care work in general. We are in a situation where we have a growing population, we have an aging population, we have the pandemic, and we have different family models emerging. And the question now is, can you return to business as usual? And the answer is, obviously, we cannot return to business as usual. Although many of us may wish so, because being in lockdowns for so many months has really tired people. But let's take this as an opportunity to review and critically review the way capitalism has shaped the existing care systems, and to understand how they are being unsustainable for a well-lived future, and also understanding how embedded the structural discrimination of women is in this system, that women have been holding up the care system, not only during the pandemic, but obviously many, many years and decades before. Their increased participation in the labor market has not been valued in the sense that care work has been shared better and fairer. So all these are issues that we need to look at, and we need to look at critically. We cannot shut our eyes. We are in a pandemic, and we have an opportunity to actively guide policies towards a better future where well-being is at the center and not singular economic interests. So we need to get we need to have a shift from a GDP-driven economy to a care-focused economy. And as you said, Laeticia, which can be described as providing decent work and and providing a future where well-being is really prioritized in the form of a care economy.
Thank you, Barbara, for this first impulse. And now I would like to ask Armine for her first introductory remarks on this.
So I'd like to echo, I guess this is what happens when you go to a progressive summit, right? You have three progressives talking about something. And so I would like to echo what Barbara has said about the paradigm shift. And I would like to echo what Fay has said about rebuilding from the bottom up. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that the care economy is the foundation of the essential economy. That we, as both have said, we can't get anything done that drives GDP without making sure we are caring for those who are too old, too young, and too sick to work. That's because we're humans first, not workers first. So this is causing some kind of existential re-examination of what it is that drives the economy in a way that 50 years of talking about the care economy has not. Because now in Canada, I'm not going to talk globally, though I would like to just earmark the fact that New Zealand now for years before the pandemic hit had established two well-being budgets, one in 2019 and one in 2018 and one in 2019 before the pandemic hit. So that, and we've been talking about how GDP isn't the right measure of progress since the 90s. And since the wake of the global financial crisis, we have always been talking about the need for inclusive growth. But now the mainstream institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, central banks around the world have been saying growth without inclusive growth, without that adjective, is useless. And so to Fay's point, it is what we are in the process, well, to both fine women's points, we are in the process of a paradigm shift from trickle down to bottom up, and from GDP and growth as being the only policy priority for governments to talking about what inclusive growth looks like and how does the care economy propel growth. And so now I want to say two more things. It was only a few weeks ago that I decided to do a back of the envelope calculation, how big is the care economy. I don't limit it to the healthcare sector because we have been having a very robust conversation about childcare and its role. And childcare is considered to be part of education. And the more I think about it, really the care economy is the care of those too old, too young, and too sick to work, as well as the care and feeding of our brains. Because we've been talking about lifelong learning and have always excluded childcare as if it is babysitting. Whereas all of the evidence shows us we learn how to learn in the first years of life. So maximizing the learning potential is the way we maximize earning potential. And that's going to be super important in the coming years. Because whereas my age group was born, I am a boomer, and the boomer explosion of babies in the late 50s and early 60s led to the highest dependency ratio in Canada and around the world in the late 50s and the early 60s. That means there was the smallest cohort of working age people supporting the largest cohort of people too young and too old to work in history. And we are about to go through that again now, not for just a few years, which was the case with the baby boom birth, but for decades as boomers exit the labor force, but falling fertility rates for decades means that there's fewer people coming in. So we have not only a paradigm shift in the way we think about the economy, but a paradigm shift in the way the economy operates. We're going to be moving from a for-profit driven model to not-for-profit driven because of the need for care, and we can't afford to pay for profit. We can't afford caring for profit as the primary way of providing care. That does lead to seriously big questions about how we value both paid and unpaid care, because the care sector not only includes, as you said, Laeticia, really well-paid jobs in both education and in healthcare in Canada, thankfully, but also some of the worst paid jobs and the most devalued jobs. And often there's a very tight link between devaluing that work and the fact that the care providers are women and women of color and recent immigrants and migrant workers and racialized. So we have got like this perfect storm, and yet The very fact of population aging, which is happening all over the global north, Canada is not alone, gives us like a gift, an opportunity to revise this. We can choose to go, as Fay said, in the direction of the lowest price possible, or in the direction of understanding that the economy is undergoing a transition. The last thing I will say is the size of the care economy is phenomenal. We talk about it as if it's a derivative, a nice to have instead of a must have. Just from GDP, from a GDP perspective in Canada, healthcare and education account for 12.3% of GDP. That there's only one other sector in this economy that rivals it's that contribution to GDP, and that's real estate. Manufacturing is far behind that, and way, way, way behind that is things like oil and gas, mining and quarrying, which we talk about all the time. We talk about manufacturing and oil and gas as if they are the drivers of the economy. They are not. Healthcare and education, the care economy, drives the economy. And when it comes to jobs, those two sectors, the care economy, constitutes 21% of all jobs. In the middle of the pandemic, when we lost a whole bunch of people because they were being furloughed, going forward because of population aging, it will be even a greater source of employment. And so the quality of those jobs, not just the quantity, but the quality of those jobs, actually building an economy from the bottom up with decent work in the things we need done, is a gift to us that we must seize. It cannot just be progressives talking about this. We saw with the ELCC movement, the early learning and childcare movement, that bankers started talking about it, that people from across the political spectrum started talking about the need for childcare. This is what we must do for the care economy in general. We must normalize the talk about this being the new motor of the next economy. And we need to reach across political stripes. We will find resistance, but we need to be aware that that's how you get a paradigm shift. Not just progressives talking amongst themselves about how to get a better care economy, but forcing other parties to say, how would you deal with these absolute realities? This context is not partisan. It is just the backdrop for any government's actions. And so I would alert everybody to a new campaign we launched called The Care Economy, onestring.ca. You can sign up. You can, if we're going to go into a federal election, we have to ask the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Greens, what is your solution for the care economy? And we have to ask that at the provincial level when we know that provinces like Alberta and Ontario and Manitoba and Saskatchewan will stonewall the potential for improving the learning potential and earning potential of our youngest residents and citizens. So we have to be pushing politically across the entire political spectrum to attain this paradigm shift. And I hope we will. I hope this group that are paying attention to this will get really active in connecting with their constituents and the candidates in their ridings for how they are going to build the care economy of the future.
Well,
Can
thank
I just add
for
in,
this.
Can I just add in
Yes,
one
of course.
other figure around the care economy? Because I think what Armine has said is phenomenally important, because that work is rendered invisible so much of the time. But the size of unpaid care work that props up the economy is even larger. The most recent stats that I was able to find on it were from 1998, and Stats Canada hasn't recalculated it since then. But at that point, the unpaid care economy was equal to 47% of GDP. And what we've seen since then is deepening privatization of care work along with an aging population. So we have to think about how all that unpaid care work falls profoundly unequally on women, and is one of the drivers of women's impoverishment across the country through all stages of their life cycle.
Thank you very much for this immediate reaction. I think what you have just mentioned is very rich, and I think there is much more to be said on this. But I'm very much grateful that you mentioned this need to move from a GDP-driven to a care-driven society and economy. And in fact, that is something that Barbara very much stresses in the paper that she recently published with FEPS. And so perhaps I would like to ask you also if this is an experience that resonates on the European scales for you.
Well, Laeticia, if you're asking me, yes. I mean, what we know is that the existing care models are very much based on an understanding that there's the invisible that there's the invisible work of women at home caring for either the elderly or the children, or caring for both. And that gender inequalities and gender discrimination, so much structurally anchored, are a major obstacle to actually put in place a real care economy, because the systems so far are relying very much on this invisible, unpaid work, considered non-market value and self-generating, and that's what we see in Europe, and in particular more traditional societies in Europe, where care work is predominantly unpaid care work is done by women. 93% of all caring in Europe is performed by women, and not only that, the care work is one of the most undervalued and underpaid work, where it actually is being paid. So that together is an enormous economic value, which we need to actually assess and bring to the fore and make visible, and care. And I want to come back to something else that I found very interesting, that Fay was mentioning, the care ethics. That's a discussion which needs to take place in Europe and in Canada and in other countries. Care is not only limited to childcare or elderly care, but care is a concept that extends to the environment, and that extends to all and every part of our lives. It is actually an aspect is in everything we do. There's a care aspect, and we need to really heed that in order to find ways to address the care economy. And I want to stress again and again that gender inequalities and women's problems with accessing their rights is a major obstacle here, and has helped to continue care models which have become unsustainable, as we know.
Yes, indeed. Feminist literature is brings very valuable insights in showing how the care ethics brings the human at the center of everything, and that we are all in a way vulnerable. It's not about taking care of the most vulnerable of us. All of us at some point will need care, and it is a highly gendered issue, which has also led many to speak of a she session in the case of the current crisis, because we see that it is mainly women being affected by the current crisis. But something also that should be mentioned as well is that it has a highly intersectional dimension, and perhaps here I would like to ask this question to Fay in a way that, you know, how could you tell us a bit more about how the valuing of work in the care economy is also means that we need to value we need to value the work of migrants.
Oh, absolutely. When we look at who is working in the most precarious, low-paid jobs in the care economy, it is disproportionately racialized women and racialized men. But increasingly, as public funding has been drawn out of the sector over the last couple of decades, what has happened to fill that gap is the privatization of services through using highly precarious migrant workers. So there, we've had the expansion, not just in childcare, elder care, care for people with disabilities in homes, but in healthcare facilities throughout the economy and in all of the other social infrastructure that supports the economy. We've had a growth in the use of low-paid migrant labor. Much of that labor is provided by workers who are from the global south who are in Canada on work permits that only allow them to work for the employer that they are assigned to on their work permit. And it creates this highly toxic imbalance of power where exploitation is the norm in these kind of work, these kind of jobs, no matter how much there has been an active denial of the degree of exploitation that's baked into the system. It is the norm, not just in the conditions of work, but through predatory recruitment and through the denial of permanent status for the people doing the work. And I just want to remind people that these programs of temporary migrant labor were developed in the 50s and the 60s specifically in order to keep Black and brown workers out of Canada, preventing them from permanent immigration to Canada. They were developed at a time when our immigration laws were explicitly race-based, and that racial divide and the lack of status has been there from the beginning and is a real driver of the racial capitalism that I was talking about that creates not just a gender divide, but a really deeply racialized divide of precarity and poverty in Canada. And we've seen, even with the most recent proposal to extend permanent residency to 90,000 workers during the pandemic, that the 500,000 plus undocumented workers who are doing this work on the front lines in direct healthcare and other essential services are wholly excluded. And many of the low-wage racialized workers who are doing this essential work in Canada will not be able to qualify because they're required to meet language benchmarks that are higher than are necessary for the jobs that they're doing.
Thank you very much for this reaction. And in fact, we often speak of global care chains, which is the result of the lack of distribution of care duties, particularly childcare, which is in a way handed over to migrant worker. But perhaps this might also not be always the most sustainable way, as this is often putting them in very precarious conditions as well. But speaking of the childcare issue, and it was mentioned earlier that Canada introduced its national budget, and it has indeed given a very significant place to childcare as well. And some have even called it as one of the most progressive since the 70s. So would you say that this is somehow the start of this paradigm shift? Are we seeing the beginning of a new political will there?
If you're asking me, I'd say yeah. I think there are enough people in the Liberal Party that they are seeing the writing on the wall in terms of how the population is changing and aging, in terms of the dynamics of how GDP is generated, in terms of the slowing GDP growth and the need from just a purely standard issue capitalist point of view to maximize GDP. All of it points to the care economy and doing that better. And it has become absolutely clear that the She session, which was global in nature and unprecedented in history, because most recessions are triggered by men losing jobs, good paid jobs, in the goods manufacturing sector, construction, real estate, construction, manufacturing, mining and quarrying. That's usually the sectors that stop first. And then women in the very first phases of reopening usually pick up crap jobs in the service sector because that's all that's available. But they never go back home. So we have, in Canada, stabilized income inequality by seeing this rising participation of women in the service sector, when the pandemic hit, not just in Canada, but around the world, non-essential services were shut. They were services, so female dominated, non-essential, so doubly female dominated, in personal services like nail and hair salons, in retail, in some types of retail, in hospitality, and critically in childcare. And so we see these non-essential services are going to be hard to bring back without policies like childcare, which is practically your only policy amenable solution to a story that hasn't finished being written yet. We don't know how many businesses we're going to lose in the pandemic. The pandemic isn't over. But we know that if we lose capacity for childcare, which has been the case in the last year, then fewer people can go to work and fewer people can stay at work. And prior to the pandemic in Canada, women made up half of payroll. So let me just paint for you a Russian doll's picture. The biggest doll is that GDP is driven by household spending. 57% of GDP in Canada is driven by household spending, which is Canadians buying stuff. In the United States, it's even bigger. It's 70% because they don't export as much. The next doll is that households with children, young children, are the biggest block of household spending. They spend the most of any group of households. The third doll is that women in these families contribute 40% of purchasing power of household income. And the fourth doll is if you knock too many women out, and we have had about 10 times as women drop out of the labor force as men in Canada, then you can never get back to so-called normal. And every party is starting to understand that essential math. And by understanding that essential math, everybody has jumped on the ELCC, the Early Learning and Childcare bandwagon. Of course, they all have different solutions, but they get it. And this is the conversation we need to expand. We need to help people understand that you might have different solutions, but here's the problem that we are trying to solve together in a way that isn't, in a way that actually challenges people to race to the top. It is very easy to hit people that we don't agree with the ugly stick. We are not going to get anywhere by simply saying, whatever your idea is, it's wrong. We need progress if we are going to have the paradigm shift that Barbara has talked about, if we are going to start valuing the work of migrant workers, and not just migrant workers, recent immigrants, and not just recent immigrants, but people that have got less education because these jobs are so poorly paid that it is assumed anybody can do them. So if we don't start talking about the value of the work, if we don't train people, if we don't compensate people properly, if we don't actually take into account all of these dimensions, we will not get that paradigm shift. And I think there's nobody in this conversation that doesn't want to see that paradigm shift take place.
And if we want to make this paradigm shift actually happen, what should be the role of the different stakeholders in this process? I'm thinking of the government, but also the private sector, communities, institutions. Any take on this, Barbara?
Before we go into this, there is one factor which we tend to exclude, and that is the factor of automation and artificial intelligence. And there are two things that happened during the pandemic, or are happening during the pandemic. One is that that many women stay at home and are not giving up their work in order to take care of children and elderly people because the other services are not available anymore. So that it's actually a backlash on women. And the second one is that there are proposals coming forward by some policy corners that say that we need to mechanize, automatize the care sector. And that means that caring will not only depend or care workers may be replaced in some instances by automated services. And we need to take that into consideration as one of the barriers towards a care economy, where again, a technocratic solution seems to be much easier than really looking at a paradigmatic shift towards a people-centered approach. So, and as to the role of institutions, I mean, it is important that the current party systems in Europe, as we know, are under attack. Apparently there's the pandemic has also shed a very critical light on the current institutions being able to handle the pandemic, and we cannot anymore rely solely on existing governmental structures, but we need to bring into the decision-making process, and Europe is in the process of talking about the future of Europe. We need to bring in civil society in en masse, and we need to bring in women's organizations and those organizations that are actually working on the ground and working with and for different groups, different discriminated groups, women and others, to be part and parcel of a policy process. The policy process needs to be democratized in the sense that those people who are affected by it, and in the case, I would make the case, women in the majority in these times, they need to be brought into the decision-making processes. And I hope very much this will be happening in the current discussion and future discussions on the future of Europe, because we need to really look at what needs to be done, not only to get out of the pandemic, but what happens afterwards. The businesses that are being closed or that don't continue anymore, and the workforce that needs to find jobs where there aren't any anymore. So very important times.
Can I just add something, please, Laeticia?
Yes, of course. And perhaps right after that, we will finish with the last round, because I see that time is already running very fast. So please, the floor is yours.
Very quickly, we've talked about a bottom-up approach in terms of the paradigm shift. That is a direct public health 101 lesson. If you want to improve the health of a population, you don't try and raise everybody's health all at once. If you raise the quality and outcome if you raise health outcomes for the poorest population, you're actually going to lift the entire gradient up. We've got 50 years of evidence showing this. So actually boosting the economy from the bottom up is good for everybody. And it's something that it's a direct public health lesson, and we should be applying it more widely. But the second thing is what Barbara was talking about, which is the role of government, which is about to change. So for talk about a big paradigm shift. The last 40 years have been not just about trickle down, but the primary message of trickle down is more market, less government. In the era of population aging, in the era of extreme climate events, in the era of increasingly difficult global supply chains and political uncertainty in alliances, our domestic governments are going to be more important than ever. We are entering a long period of more government, less market. We are entering a period, if we do this right, more nonprofit, less for-profit activity within GDP. This is maybe more of a profound paradigm shift, and one that is going to be actively resisted by everybody, but we have to show how it is inevitable. It is totally inevitable because of population aging, because of extreme climate events, and because of our increasing inwardness, because we cannot rely on previous versions of international globalization, such as free trade agreements. Export-driven growth was the secret sauce for the last 40 years, and we ignored our own people as a result. We were always looking for a middle class that was growing someplace else to cash in on. Every country is looking more inward now, and every country is more reliant on the government now than ever before, and that is not going to change in the coming years. And I just want to alert that, as much as we're talking about civil society, we have to understand that governments are us, and we are going to be more reliant on governments than we have seen in all of our lifetimes. And we have to put a lot of pressure on our elected representatives to do what we need, because there's a lot of them that just want to help their friends. And no country, including Canada, is exempt from that pressure.
On that same line, I want to highlight how so much of the care economy that provides the social and community services that uphold our communities is based on a charity-driven model where those services are highly precarious, dependent on donations, have been hit hard through the pandemic. And this is particularly significant when you look at the massive increase in violence against women during the pandemic, which has risen like really exponentially. But that sector of social services broadly, and particularly for the so-called women's sector, is heavily dependent on a charitable model that has to end. Those are core services that can't be left to, what people have got left over out of goodwill.
Well, since we have also been speaking so much about the various challenges, and also to finish on a positive and future-oriented note, for the last round and for the concluding remarks, I would like to ask each of you two main questions. First is, if we do this right, what is the kind of change that we hope to see from an economic, social, or environmental perspective? And second, how can the people participating in the summit learn more and support building the caring economy? Perhaps starting with Armine.
Thank you for that excellent question, because we all have something we can do. So what is the outcome that I would hope if we do our campaign properly in the next few decades? Is that we are reducing gaps in outcomes for those who are historically and systemically locked out of opportunity and locked out of a good life. Because we can do that. That's the moment we are poised on. That's the gift that is the silver lining in the cloud of population aging, is we can actually bring in more people from who have been sidelined systematically for decades, and making sure that life outcomes, not just incomes, but outcomes, are improved for Indigenous populations, for recent immigrants, for youth, for the elderly, for women, for people of color, and for migrant workers, and actually reducing, hopefully, the titer of migrant workers in our midst, because we didn't used to rely on them as a primary provider of labor in an era where we are going to have widespread labor and skill shortages. This is a gift to get our immigration policy right and to make us truly a people magnet. So how can you be part of that? Well, one thing you can do is check into thecareeconomy.ca, write to your member of parliament, write to any candidate. If we trigger another federal election in the coming months, possibly it will be the first election in the cascade of elections we're going to have in Canada, both federally and provincially. Ask every candidate, whatever your interest is in the care economy, how would they fix the problems that are so abundant in our conversation? Whether that's the charity model, whether that's the for-profit model, whether that's are we talking about care? Are we talking about more money in your pocket, which doesn't change a damn thing about the way the market is delivered? We can engage all of the people who want to be our elected representatives to do better by us. And we think the careeconomy.ca is step one in that process. We look forward to working with you to change our world.
Thank you very much. And Fay, in a few sentences, the floor is yours.
I agree that what we need to do is pull together a truly intersectional perspective on what well-being means, and the opportunity to rebuild a green economy at the same time as we're building the care economy, at the same time that we're building status for all. Right now, 1 in 23 people in Canada has temporary status, and that is unsustainable. All of those things are a critical opportunity that we have. I'd encourage people to look at the Rising Together webinar series that's available on the Equal Pay Coalition website, equalpaycoalition.org, which brought together racialized, Indigenous, and people with disabilities and youth to talk about what is needed in an intersectional feminist recovery. That's there. I think that this is an opportunity for us to articulate metrics for what does matter, for how to measure progress in a well-being economy that looks at economic, social well-being, mental health, and all the different dimensions of health and to demand that from our elected representatives.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Barbara, we have 15 seconds to close.
Okay, very quickly. I think my plea would be no, a policy without money is poetry. So what we need to see is real heavy public investments into the care sector, into valuing care, not treating care or social or public investment as a deficit, but as a benefit, as an investment. That care is worthy of investment means we value care more, and that needs to be done. And in terms of what people can do, well, think feminist, claim your rights, write to your representative. Don't take no for an answer. Ask for higher pay. I mean, these are all things each individual can do. Is claiming your rights and asking for more investment in the care sector.
So thank you very much. On this note, I would like to warmly thank our three honorable speakers for bringing their expertise to enrich this debate. On behalf of FELPS, I would like also to thank the Broadband Institute for making this event possible at the very first place, and for also to all the co-organizing partners committing to progressive politics and debates. I believe that we will all take away ideas on how we can strive for fairer, people-centered society and economy, and where no one is left behind. Not only because this is crucial for the achievement of gender equality, but simply because it's something that connects us all deeply as human beings, regardless of who we are across class, ages, gender, or race. Once again, confirming that what we need is a society placing care at the center and not at the margin. So thank you very much.